We start the course strengthening data management adaptability and efficiency. Data management capabilities cannot remain static, and in most organizations, the pressure to evolve is already visible. Business conditions shift, regulatory expectations tighten, and technology continues to move faster than governance frameworks were originally designed to handle. This is where maturity management becomes relevant, not as a periodic assessment, but as a sustained governance capability. Over time, its role moves to helping organizations continually read where their data management capabilities stand, identify what needs to adapt, and build the conditions for meaningful improvement. Think of it as a mechanism that keeps governance honest, connected to what is actually happening across the capability landscape, not just what was planned at the beginning of the year. Because without that connection, even well-designed frameworks gradually drift from the reality they were meant to support. The focus from here is on how maturity management is actually structured inside an organization, not as a concept but as a working capability. That structure runs across three levels: strategic, tactical, and operational, each playing a distinct role in keeping governance connected to reality. Attention goes to the components that bring it to life: the processes, roles, outputs, and governance mechanisms that support continuous adaptation over time. In practice, when maturity management breaks down, it's usually because one of these components is missing or disconnected from the others. This is where the lesson goes into that structure and into what it looks like when it actually works. There is a relationship worth understanding before going further, and it sits at the heart of the governance actually improves over time. Measuring performance and assessing maturity are two sides of the same coin. Performance management focuses on outcomes, the metrics that reflect whether data and AI management are delivering what the organization needs. Maturity assessment looks at something different: the processes, systems, and readiness that make those outcomes possible in the first place. One tells you what is happening, the other tells you why. Together, they provide something neither can offer alone: a complete picture of where current capabilities stand and what future potential looks like. In practice, organizations that track only performance can see the results but struggle to explain them. Those that assess only maturity understand their processes but lose sight of whether any of it is actually working. This is where the two connect, and why treating them as one integrated capability is what drives meaningful, sustained growth across data and AI management. Designing any governance capability starts with clarifying its purpose, the strategic aspiration it means to fulfill. Purpose sets direction, but it doesn't yet show progress. Progress becomes visible through outcomes, measurable results that indicate whether the intended value is being achieved. Each outcome is supported by outputs, tangible deliverables that provide observable evidence of advancement. Outputs are produced through processes that transform specific inputs into structured results. For that flow to function reliably, enabling components must be in place: regulations that guide execution, roles that ensure accountability, and tools that support automation and traceability. These components don't create outcomes directly, they enable processes to run consistently, which delivers outputs and over time makes outcomes achievable. With that structure in mind, it becomes easier to examine how their governance capabilities has evolved and what needs to be in place for it to function. Let's discuss how you can design the data management maturity capability. Let's discuss the definition of maturity in the context of this course. Data management maturity is a measurement of an organization's ability to continuously improve its data management practices. Not a snapshot of where things stand today, but an indicator of whether the organization is genuinely capable of getting better over time. This distinction matters because maturity is not about perfection, it's about sustained directional progress. A few years ago, I delivered a session on data management maturity at Enterprise Data World in the United States. And one moment from that discussion has stayed with me. A participant shared that his boss believed the organization was not mature enough to perform a maturity assessment. I remember pausing for a moment, because in my experience, that assumption misses the point entirely. Maturity assessment is not a reward for advanced organizations. It's a navigation tool, and any organization serious about building a data management function benefits from it. Over time, the advantages have become consistently visible. Planning becomes more realistic. Assessment helps clarify ambition by showing where you stand and where it makes sense to move next. Connected to that is performance measurement. In my practice, maturity measurement and KPI design are closely linked, reflecting different angles of the same development journey. And benchmarking adds perspective. Seeing your position relative to industry peers often shifts how progress is perceived and can quietly strengthen competitiveness. That's why maturity measurement is not about labeling an organization as advanced or behind. It's about direction and about having an honest, structured way to find it. Maturity measurement doesn't happen at a single level. It unfolds across the organization, and each level plays a different role. At the strategic level, the focus is direction. Leadership defines how mature the organization intends to become. Ambition is clarified and target state is agreed. Something you can point to and say, this is where we are heading. One level down, structure starts to take shape. The maturity model gets aligned with enterprise capabilities, criteria become visible, and priorities are shaped into a roadmap. This is where intent starts to feel like a plan. At the operational level, reality surfaces. Teams provide evidence of how capabilities actually function day to day. Strengths and weaknesses emerge through scoring that reflects what people genuinely experience on the ground, not what's intended on paper. When you see all three levels working together, something shifts. Maturity measurement stops feeling like a label and becomes a genuine governance mechanism. Strategy sets direction, structure creates the path, operations reveal the truth. And in my experience, that clarity one becomes useful when all three levels are connected. Maturity and performance management influence multiple organizational levels, which is why this course focuses on several different professional groups. At the strategic level, executive roles such as the Chief Data Officer or Chief AI Officer use maturity and performance insights to guide long-term governance direction, investment priorities, and organizational adaptation. Technical leaders, including data governance managers and data steward leads, operate much closer to coordination and execution oversight. Their activities usually involve organizing assessment, interpreting results, consolidating findings, and translating governance insights into structured improvement action. At the operational level, data stewards and governance professionals work directly with the evidence that supports maturity and performance evaluation. They monitor execution quality, maintain assessment information, and identify operational deviations that later influence broader governance decisions. Together, these three organizational layers create a continuous governance feedback mechanism that supports capability adaptation and operational efficiency across the enterprise. The purpose of data maturity measurement is to provide an objective basis for guiding capability development across the organization. It creates a shared reference point for evaluating data and AI capabilities consistently. The first outcome is clear maturity positioning against defined capability criteria. People can see where capabilities truly stand today. Leadership can hear a consistent story instead of mixed opinions. The second outcome is defined target maturity levels aligned with ambitions. The organization senses what good looks like for its context. Targets become explicit, realistic, and comparable across domains. The third outcome is a prioritized and measurable improvement roadmap. Gaps translate into sequenced actions. Progress becomes traceable over time rather than assumed. Together, these outcomes turn maturity measurement into a practical steering mechanism. Maturity measurement becomes real through concrete outputs. Without them, assessment remains a discussion. The first output is the enterprise data and AI maturity model. It defines the criteria. It clarifies what each level actually means, and it creates a shared language across the organization. Assessment questionnaires and the evaluation framework translate that model into practice. They structure how evidence is collected, and they ensure consistency across domains. The Consolidated Maturity Assessment Report brings visibility. It summarizes positioning across capabilities. It allows leadership to recognize patterns rather than isolated signals. A capability level gap analysis follows. It highlights where execution does not yet meet the defined level. Finally, the prioritized improvement roadmap connects assessment with action. It sequences initiatives. It links maturity findings to structured development. Together, these outputs transform measurement into direction. Maturity cannot be measured in a vacuum. It depends on structured inputs. The starting point is a clearly defined capability framework. Without it, there is nothing to assess. Maturity criteria and level definitions provide the evaluation structure. They prevent subjective scoring. Existing policies and documented practices show formal intent. KPIs and operational metrics reveal the execution reality. Audit results and issue records expose weaknesses. They add factual evidence. Stakeholder input adds perspective from daily practice. And finally, strategic objectives define ambition. They give the maturity measurement direction. When these inputs are reliable, the assessment becomes objective rather than opinion-based. Behind every credible maturity assessment is a document that makes it work, the Enterprise Data and AI Maturity Measurement Standard. It defines how maturity is assessed across the organization, consistently and with a shared understanding of what is being evaluated. The standard sets the scope of capabilities included in the assessment. It describes each maturity level in practical terms, so people recognize what each level looks like in reality, not just on paper. Clear scoring criteria ensure the evaluation stays consistent across domains and assessors. The standard also addresses how evidence must be collected and validated. Roles and responsibilities are clarified so that the result remains credible rather than contents. Reporting expectations and assessment frequency are defined to ensure continuity over time. Without such a standard, maturity measurement becomes negotiable, shaped by whoever is conducting it and whatever evidence happens to be available. With it, the organization gains something more valuable, a stable reference point that supports structured, directional development regardless of who is in the room. Maturity management becomes operational only when assessment activities are supported by structured processes. The process usually starts with defining and periodically updating the maturity model itself. Organizations adjust assessment dimensions, evaluation criteria, and maturity expectations as business priorities and governance conditions evolve. Once the model is established, maturity assessment execution begins across the targeted data management capabilities. Information is collected from organizational levels, evaluated against the model, and translated into measurable maturity results. The process doesn't stop with scoring. Capability gap assessment then examines where maturity remains insufficient, inconsistent, or misaligned with organizational objectives. Some gaps may indicate missing governance mechanisms. Others may reveal operational weaknesses or limited scalability. Together, these processes transform maturity management from periodic evaluation into a continuous capability adaptation mechanism. As maturity management becomes more integrated into the governance capability, another question naturally appears. Who actually drives these activities across the organization? Defining and updating the maturity model usually begins at the governance council level because the model must reflect enterprise priorities, regulatory expectations, and long-term capability direction. Executive governance roles, including the Chief Data Officer and Chief AI Officer, then help translate that direction into a practical assessment structure coordinated through the Governance Office. Once the model is established, the same governance groups typically oversee maturity assessment execution to maintain consistency across business domains and organizational levels. Over time, the discussion gradually shifts away from assessment itself and toward interpretation of the results. Capability gap analysis becomes more strategic because leadership starts identifying where governance mechanisms remain weak, fragmented, or insufficient for future conditions. Governance officers support this work by consolidating findings and connecting them to improvement planning. Through this structure, maturity management evolves from an isolated evaluation exercise into a coordinated governance capability that continuously guides organizational adaptation. For maturity measurement to feel credible, each level needs a distinct contribution. At the strategic level, executives define the ambition and connect it to the business direction. That connection gives the assessment weight and signals that maturity is not just a technical exercise. Once leadership confirms which gaps matter most, investment decisions start to align with governance priorities. Moving to the tactical layer, leaders translate ambitions into a structured assessment rhythm that the organization can follow. Calibration across domains keeps scoring consistent and prevents subjective interpretation. A consolidated perspective then begins to reveal patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. At the operational level, data governance professionals anchor the entire process in evidence. Interviews, documentation reviews, and structured observations make each rating defensible. Clear traceability builds confidence when results are discussed with stakeholders. Over time, tracking follow-up actions allows the organization to actually sense progress. When these layers operate in alignment, maturity measurement shifts from reporting to governance steering. Instead of producing isolated scores, the process starts to support structured and measurable evolution. As the maturity capability becomes more integrated into governance, expectations at the strategic level also begin to change. Executive leadership no longer looks only at whether governance activities exist. Attention gradually shifts toward understanding whether capabilities remain aligned with the business priorities, regulatory expectations, and long-term organizational direction. This requires knowledge of governance strategy, maturity concepts, and enterprise risk exposure. Strategic executives also need the ability to interpret maturity and performance trends rather than isolated indicators. One capability may appear operationally stable while slowly losing strategic relevance. Another may require additional investment because maturity remains insufficient for future business conditions. Communication and leadership alignment, therefore, becomes just as important as analytical interpretation. At this level, maturity management supports strategic adjustment decisions that influence the broader data management capability landscape. At the technical level, maturity capability management becomes more operational and coordination oriented. Governance managers and capability leads usually stand between strategic direction and operational execution. Because of that position, they need a detailed understanding of maturity assessment methods, performance structures, and capability interdependencies. Their role often involves coordinating assessment across domains, consolidating findings, and translating results into structured improvement activities. Analytical thinking becomes important because capability gaps rarely appear in isolation. Weakness in one capability may influence execution quality somewhere else in the government environment. Technical leaders also spend significant time facilitating discussions between business, governance, and operational teams. Over time, their ability to interpret results and coordinate improvement actions becomes one of the key drivers behind continuous capability adoption and operational efficiency. At the operational level, maturity management moves closest to daily execution activities. Data stewards and governance professionals usually work directly with the evidence that later shapes maturity conclusions. Because of this, they need practical knowledge of assessment procedures, governance processes, and operational performance indicators. Their activities often include collecting evidence, maintaining records, monitoring execution quality, and reporting deviations. Attention to detail becomes essential because even small inconsistencies may distort broader assessment results. Collaboration also plays a major role since operational professionals continuously interact with business users, governance managers, and technical teams. Over time, these operational activities create the factual foundation that support technical interpretation and strategic governance decisions. In practice, maturity and performance management become reliable only when operational execution remains disciplined and consistent across the organization. Three tools make data management maturity measurement practical and credible. In many organizations, assessments feel abstract until structure appears. A structured questionnaire creates that structure and brings comparable input from different domains. Let's consider one example. During one enterprise review, identical questions exposed completely different interpretations of operational. and the room suddenly became attentive. A maturity scoring matrix then translates responses into clearly described levels. Defined descriptors reduce debate and replace subjective judgment with shared understanding. Finally, a capability heat map dashboard makes patterns visible within seconds. In a steering discussion, a single heat map shifted attention from defending scores to recognizing investment priorities. When these three tools work together, maturity measurement stops feeling theoretical. The process starts to sound consistent, look transparent, and feel actionable across the organization. Financial enablers determine whether maturity measurement remains theoretical or drives real improvement. Without a dedicated assessment budget, evaluations tend to depend on goodwill and spare capacity. A clearly allocated assessment budget signals that maturity measurement is a planned activity, not an afterthought. Funding reserved for closing prioritized gaps transforms identified weaknesses into structured initiatives. When investment follows assessment results, improvement begins to feel tangible. Performance-linked governance funding reinforces accountability at the leadership level. Linking financial decisions to maturity progress creates a visible connection between governance ambition and enterprise value. With these financial enablers in place, maturity measurement moves from reporting toward measurable evolution. Data Crossroads Academy will provide targeted courses to elaborate on the data management maturity measurement across professional levels. The course Measuring Data Management Maturity already exists. It explains how maturity levels are structured and interpreted. The training, designing and performing a data and AI maturity assessments goes one step further. Focus shifts from understanding maturity to designing and executing the whole assessment cycle. Attention is placed on defining the model structure, calibrating scoring logic, and organizing evidence collection. Practical guidance also covers how to consolidate findings into a coherent capability view. Real enterprise cases illustrate how assessments move from questionnaires to board-level discussions. Tactical data governance managers will recognize this as their core responsibility area. Strategic sponsors gain clarity on how ambition levels translate into measurable governance progress. By the end, maturity assessment no longer feels abstract. Instead, it becomes a structured, defensible, and business-aligned governance instrument. Congratulations! We completed the theoretical part of topic 1. Now it's time for quiz. Now it's time for exercise. You can perform self-assessment of the data management maturity measurement capability in your organization. You can download the checklist, and depending on your level accountability, you can review the checklist. For each listed component, simply verify whether it formally exists in your organization.